Hey, Behind the Prop fans, my name is Nick, the voice and producer of the Behind the Prop podcast. A little note for today's show. This is going to sound like a joke, but it's serious. Wally just got a new cat. In the middle of recording the episode today, Wally's cat walked across the keyboard and stopped the recording from the feed from his microphone. So just under 30 minutes in, we're going to pause the show there, and we'll call this show today part 1. And then in 2 weeks, the guys will be back. You can join them for part 2 of this great episode. It's a mock instrument check ride. Let's get to the show.
Clear prop.
Star 73, Yankee number 2, following twin traffic, 3 mile final, clear subject. 1 Charlie Bravo, exited in runway 25, going 4 mile final.
This is Behind the Prop with United Flight Systems owner and licensed pilot Bobby Doss and its co-host, Major Airline Captain and designated pilot examiner Wally Mulhern. Now let's go Behind the Prop.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby. How are you?
I am fantastic as always. We're in our 4th year plus now, Wally, and it's exciting to do this every couple of weeks now. We've shared over 150 episodes with our listeners, and this is going to be an episode that somewhat replicates something we did a few weeks back on private. We've got a lot of good feedback, lots of positive comments, and really people asking for more. And so we're going to do a mock check ride, doing the instrument mock check ride, following the ACS, hopefully kind of loosening the nerves for some people that are about to take that check ride, understand what the ACS guides you through and kind of what the DPE is looking for. Wally, I talk to people all the time and they're like, man, just tell me what Wally's going to ask me. They want this golden gouge of Wally Mulhern. Isn't that really just what the ACS is?
It is. It absolutely is. I mean, we're going to go through the ACS. We're going to cover what's in the ACS. And there are no tricks. There are really no tricks for this. It's right there. I meing, I remember my college classes when the professor would say the tests are going to come from the study guide. It was like cha-ching. I might be able to pass this class because I know where the tests are coming from. Well, the test is coming from the ACS, and everything is spelled out. Are we going to cover everything, all the knowledge, all the risk element, all the skills? No, we're going to cover one knowledge element, one risk management, and all the skills. But having said that, the way I'm going to do it, it's going to be as it relates to a cross-country flight. And it really doesn't matter where we're going, but I give my applicants a cross-country scenario from Houston to Tulsa, Oklahoma. And it's far enough to where you might want to make a fuel stop, but it's close enough to where you could probably make it nonstop if you so choose to do so. So it gives gives us the opportunity to discuss, why are we doing this in 2 legs? Did you consider doing it nonstop? Or, I'm always going to play devil's advocate. If they do it nonstop, I'm going to say, why didn't you make a fuel stop? If they make a fuel stop, I'm going to say, why didn't we do it nonstop? And, they're both correct. However you want to do it, as long as you meet the fuel requirements, it's up to you as the pilot.
And I probably know the answer to this question, but you're not doing that to be like a jerk DPE. I'm assuming you're doing that to make the pilot think, right? Like, why are you doing this? What's the decision-making criteria? Are you critically thinking about what this outcome is going to produce one way or the other? And when does it become, it might be green just to fly direct to Tulsa on a fairly decent day under an IFR flight plan, but it might go yellow or red depending on a lot of other criteria. If it's tornado season in Oklahoma, the movie Twister's out, and I did go see it. So, that's the time of year you wouldn't want to get caught up in that in a Cessna. So it changes the thought process, and you as the DPE are really just trying to make sure their critical thinking and or thought processes are going to produce the right decisions.
Yeah, and it depends on the airplane too. I mean, instrument flying can be very fatiguing, especially to a newer pilot doing it, especially if you're in an airplane with no autopilot. Just just flying straight and level in the clouds, might take a lot of brain power, and you become mentally fatigued pretty quick.
Yeah, no question. And it might be easier when you have a little bit of a crew helping you than you're all alone with your wife for the first time she's ever been in the clouds, i.e. that was me. And the stress level is immensely different when you're not with a CFI and you're doing it by yourself for the first time in the dark, by the way. So those things add up. So you're trying to make sure that the pilot's really going to be capable and safe under all conditions, because you're not giving them an IFR instrument rating to fly on VFR days, filing a flight plan when they can cheat, right? So
right.
You got to make sure they're really capable of doing the job.
Yeah, and an instrument rating is very interesting, because it is probably the only certification or license, whatever you want to call it. I know it's not a license, so it is a rating, but it's the only one of the only governmental certifications that you can achieve without ever having done it. Think about this. You could do all your instrument flight training in visual conditions, wearing the hood. And now you come in, you take an instrument check ride, you pass it. Tomorrow you're legal to go out and fly in the clouds.
2 minimums,
and you've never done it. Yeah, you've
in
never done
whatever
it.
conditions, right? Yeah.
So I really would encourage you. There's certain geographical parts of the country where it's hard to find a cloud, but flying in the clouds is liquid. It's gold. It is gold. I mean, it's something that you really, hopefully, will have some experience. And then after you get your instrument rating, it's not just if you're looking for a pilot career. It's not time to put down the instrument stuff and go out and start doing Shondells and Lazy Eights. You've got to hone that skill. Instrument flying is a very erodible skill, especially as a new pilot. It's something you need to do. So you need to look for that day when it's maybe 1,800 broken. And okay, yeah, let me go out and pop in and out of some clouds, and then the next day when it's 1,400 broken, you got a little confidence. Then it's 1,700 overcast, and work yourself up to it. A person who's going to run a marathon, I don't think goes out day one and runs 26.2 miles. I think you'd build up to it. I don't know. I've never run a marathon, but.
So if we dive into what to expect, I've got your Tulsa assignment. I've done my flight plan. I've thought through every scenario that you might tell me or ask me about based on what. Do you give specific weather, or do you say use yesterday's weather, tomorrow's weather, or the day of weather? What do you do from an assignment perspective?
No, I like to use real-time weather, because as we're sitting there in the room, I like to say, okay, hey, we're going up here, and this happened, and something where a diversion might be prudent, and I want to be able to jump in and say, okay, tell me what the weather is at the diversion airport. So, I do use real-time weather, and there may not be a cloud in the sky between here and Tulsa and, on the day that we're going. But then again, you just never know. So we use real-time weather.
I got very lucky on my check ride that you did with me. It was reported calm at every airport for 30 miles. So I had the best instrument check ride weather and winds possible, but I still had to execute. So at the end of the day, you give me the Tulsa, you give me current weather situations. I've done my planning. Hopefully I've got a good night's sleep. I come into the check ride room or conference room, wherever I'm meeting my DPE. What's the ACS going to do to start the process? I'm assuming there's some normal formalities that we have to go through on an instrument check ride.
Yeah, we're gonna qualify the applicant. We're gonna qualify the airplane, and make sure you have the required time, the 40 hours of instrument time, the required cross-country time and everything. We're going to take a look at the airplane. We're going to make sure the airplane is IFR capable. So it's had its, required pedostatic check and all that. Make sure, I'll ask about the database, make sure it's up to date. And, of course, we may not see the actual database till we get out to the airplane. But we'll talk about making sure the database is up to date. Make sure all their publications are up to date, whatever they're going to use, if it's a EFB or paper charts, which I haven't seen paper charts in a long time. So most people are using an EFB, but just make sure, if we're using the popular one that most of us use, make sure there's no red number down at the bottom right that says you got to update some things. So
if that checks out, and we talk all the time, so I know the answer, but some of the listeners may be new to the show. What has to be done for you? Is there anything that has to be done for you to qualify for the Checkride that day?
Yeah, I mean, I have to meet all the requirements. I have to have a current medical and be legal to fly the airplane. Again, I'm not. I am not usually pilot in command. Instrument checkride is where the water begins to muddy a little bit. I can be pilot in command, but the FAA strongly suggests that I not be pilot in command. There have only been a handful of check rides in over 1,000 where I actually assumed the duties of pilot in command. And one of them was actually a check ride that I did at United Flight Systems many years ago. It was the day before Houston hosted a Super Bowl, and Houston airspace was not accepting any VFR traffic. There wasn't a cloud in the sky, but the only way we could do an instrument check ride was to file an IFR flight plan. And so technically the applicant is not IFR rated, so they cannot file an IFR flight plan. So we filed an IFR flight plan. I assumed the duties of pilot in command, and off we went. So, that is one example. And of course I have to be IFR current. So I would say don't plan on that. Some examiners are more inclined to assume the duties of pilot command. And we're talking weather, if it is a day where, am I going to do an instrument check ride on a day when it's 1,000 overcast? I'm not. Okay. Others may, but I wouldn't. Now, if it were a day where it was, 2,400 broken, would I? Yeah, I probably would. So anyway, it just depends.
So you talked through qualifying the pilot. You and the pilot are not qualified. The aircraft's been qualified. What does the applicant expect next on a instrument check ride? And you're using the ACS to create your plan of action, right? You are required to have a plan of action. We talked about this on the private set of shows. You've got the plan of action. What's next?
Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say we're taking a cross country flight to Tulsa. How does it look? And we'll usually talk about weather. Yeah. Now the weather is task B under pre-flight preparation, and pilot qualification is task A. But we will. It's just a very broad question. How's the weather? Well, it looks pretty good. It's and one thing that I will get from a lot of applicants, I'll hear them say, in the scenario, we're kind of role playing in that the applicant is instrument rated. So a lot of times I'll hear them say, "Oh, I wouldn't go." I'd say, "Well, why not? Why not?" Well, it's forecast for Tulsa is 1,800 broken. I said, well, if you were instrument rated, you would not go. And there's no wrong answer. I mean, if you wouldn't go with 1800 broken, well, you wouldn't go. But I'm hoping the applicant will be thinking more like an instrument rated pilot and say, yeah, I'm confident in going with 1800 broken. So we'll talk about I'll talk about things like, well, what's our routing? How'd you file? Did you file Victor Airways? Are we using VORs? Are we using GPS? So we'll talk about the route, and the next thing we'll talk about the time en route. Okay, what's the time en route? Okay, it's 3 hours, let's say, and well, how much fuel do we have on board? We have 5 hours of fuel. Okay, and again, I like to talk of fuel as in minutes. Okay, because that's really where the rubber meets the highway. How much time do we have left? Then I'll say, do we need an alternate today? And it's a little bit of a trick question, because I get into having an alternate and filing an alternate. If you read in the regulations under Part 91, they talk about when you must file an alternate. I think every flight you should have multiple alternates. I took a trip to New Orleans earlier in the summer from Houston, and the way I looked at it is I went from Houston to Beaumont to Lake Charles to Lafayette to Baton Rouge to New Orleans. And, of course, I wasn't zigzagging to get over there, but that's kind of how I was thinking. All along I'm thinking, okay, if I have an issue, I'm turning around and going back. Okay, I'm beyond that. Okay, if I have a problem, I'm going into Beaumont. Okay, so I had all these alternates in my mind. Now, it was a VFR flight, but had I filed IFR, an alternate would not be required to be filed. And so then I'll get into why do we have to file an alternate? An alternate is our plan B. Why do we have to tell the FAA what our plan B is? And, everybody will say, well, for fuel planning. I said, well, on a VFR flight, we've got to have the proper amount of fuel, but we don't have to prove that to the FAA, do we? So why do we have to file an alternate? And it really comes down to loss of communications. That is why we are filing an alternate. And, if we have lost comm, where are we going?
What do you think causes a lost comm in a lot of circumstances? It's obviously the weather's dictating the requirement to file the alternate, but I can remember, again, my flight day was beautiful. A lot of my IFR flight time, meaning when I've been filed under a flight plan, I've been in VFR conditions, right? What do you think the lost comm reason's going to be most of the time in planes that we're flying?
I don't have any data to back me up, but most of the airplanes that we're flying have 2 comm radios. So, what are the chances of both comms going out? Of 2 comms going out? It's a little bit like, I say to people, how many TVs do you have in your house? And hopefully the answer is 2 or more. And I'll say, what are the chances of both TVs in your house going out? And let's say, well, total loss of electrical power. And I go, exactly. So then I will get into, well, what are we going to do with a total electrical failure? And usually what I get is, and the scenario I'll say, okay, it's a bad day. Okay, it's a really bad day, but it's 1,000 overcast everywhere within range of the airplane. And the tops are up to flight level 180, so we can't get above it. We're in the clouds. We're in the soup. And, you know, the point that I'm trying to make is in this scenario, not only do we have lost communication, but we have lost navigation as well. You know, they'll say, okay, well, I'm going to fly my last assigned route and all, and they go through all that. But, you know, that's all assuming that we can navigate. And we may not be able to navigate. You know, if we've had a total electrical failure, we can't navigate.
You mean the Garmin 430 doesn't run on the vacuum system?
It does not. Last time I checked, it did not. You know, a lot of people will say, they'll say, "Oh yeah, we're going to lose our GPS. We're going to have to use the VOR." I go, "Oh, okay. So we got a solar VOR."
That's going to be a bad day, no matter how you spin it. Now, at least we get to keep our attitude and some other things because we do have the vacuum system, but we're not going to be able to do much more than follow a compass, and hopefully we've got some really good nav charts and other things. But assuming we're in this bad weather, and we've been in this bad weather, what are you expecting an applicant to tell you at that point, or what do you want them to tell you? What kind of decision-making do you want them to have?
Well, again, this is a really bad day, and you know, a lot of them will say, "Well, I'm just going to descend." Okay, it's 1,000 overcast, so you're just going to descend and hope that there are no towers there. And this may sound really taboo, but could we navigate using the iPad? It might be
not legally, Wally, but in this scenario, you're sure I'm going to be.
Well, you know, is it legal? Because is it now an emergency?
Correct. Good point.
I sit there in the briefing room and I say, look, I'm sitting there usually holding a pen. I say, if a bad guy came in this room with a gun and was going to do bad things to us, would I use this pen as a weapon? Darn right I would. Mm-hmm. So, am I advocating just going around and flying with nothing more than an iPad? Absolutely not. So please don't think I'm saying this, but I'm trying to sound like a guy who has had a total electrical failure in an airplane. Now, the time I had it, there wasn't a cloud in the sky, so it really wasn't an issue. But I was on an IFR flight plan. I mean, when I finally got on the ground, I had to call Houston Clearance Delivery and say, "Hey, man, total electrical failure. We're on the ground. We're all good." So it can happen. And it's a handful.
So let's assume this isn't the worst day ever on the Checkride day, and we're still in the early part of this Checkride, and we're talking about weather. And I've told you I've got an alternate, but I don't have to file an alternate based on current weather's situation. How much are you going to dive into all these things? I can remember like really stressing over service analysis charts and being able to talk about all the icons and legends and the tasks and everything. How much are you going to want to talk through that if the weather's good versus a bad weather day, or just in general?
Well, one thing that I am definitely going to dive into is icing conditions and how it would affect our airplane. And for most of us, we don't want to have anything to do with icing conditions in these smaller airplanes. But, we're going to definitely talk about that, and we're going to talk about whether we have anti-icing or de-icing equipment on the airplane and, that sort of thing. But that's something that I think is absolutely imperative, and we're going to talk about that. We are going to talk a little bit about the currency requirements and what do we need to be considered legal to fly IFR? And if we don't have it, what are our options? Everybody's going to tell me 6 hits. And, of course, it's, 6 instrument approaches in the last 6 months, holding, intercepting, and tracking. I say, okay, well, it's been 7 months. What are your options? And, most people are pretty good with this. And I'll say it's been 13 months. What are your options at that point? We'll talk about that. We'll talk a little bit about maybe, okay, as an instrument-rated pilot, can you fly under basic med? And the answer is, yeah, you can. So, that's another aspect to look at. We are incorporating more basic med questions in the Checkrides. So we'll talk about that a little bit. But we're going to get into, I'm probably going to try to find some bad weather on the chart somewhere, somewhere on the map. And we'll talk about that, and we'll look at some charts. We'll talk about the forecast, what we need to look at. And again, the requirements for filing an alternate. And, what I get a lot of is, I'll say, when is an alternate required to be filed? And people will throw out, oh, it's the 1, 2, 3 rule. Okay, well, great. What's the 1, 2, 3 rule? 1,000-foot ceiling within 2 hours and 3 miles visibility, And so they've got the 1, 2, 3. They've learned the little gouge. They learned the acronym, but they really don't know the answer to the question. So CFIs, I would encourage you to teach your students the material, and then maybe after they've learned the material, then teach them the little the gouge for remembering it. So
you talked about ice. That's a critical one, and it was just yesterday. I was scrolling through Facebook or something, and some video showed up on my screen of a lady who had lost full control at about 8,000 feet, and you could tell she was in full panic, and it appeared she had picked up some ice, right? None of us want to be in that situation in these little airplanes for sure. Something we all need to know, and just listening to that, it breaks your heart. But at around 6,000 feet, she got control, and things seemed to stabilize for her. What about onboard weather? What's in the iPad? Do you critique a lot of that? Do you challenge a lot of that stuff? What's the students' knowledge need to be?
Yeah, I do. No, I ask about it, and the onboard weather that you typically have on an iPad. I just want them to know that it's delayed. It's a couple minutes behind, so it's not real time. It's really close, and it does a really good job, but it's not. It's not weather radar.
Okay, and that's our show for this week. Join us next time for part 2. And remember, as always, stay behind the prop.
Thanks for checking out the Behind the Prop podcast. Be sure to click subscribe and check us out online at BehindTheProp.com. Behind the Prop is recorded in Houston, Texas. Creator and host is Bobby Doss. Co-host is Wally Mulhern. The show is for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to replace actual flight instruction. Thanks for listening, and remember, fly safe.